No dramas.
Oh,
Head,
oh,
shoulders,
oh.
knee. Yep, we're live.
Oh, very good. Do you want
Head,
to share
shoulders,
the
knees.
link and I'll do everything from my side?
Head, shoulders, knees and toes, knees and toes. No dramas.
And we are live. Good evening. Alan said he can't hear anything. That's because we were muted, Alan. Ladies,
Or is death.
or is deaf. Ladies, gentlemen, boys, girls, toasters, kettles, saucepans, and microwaves. We are live tonight with our Premiership review from 2024, a year which saw the Bellevue Aces crown league champions. The Birmingham Brummies propped the table up with very strong shoulders and a little bit of dodgy refereeing. I am joined as always by the legendary Daniel Palmer. Dan, how are you, son?
Alright, me old fruit. How are you?
Cold and sick of fireworks.
It'll all be over come Wednesday night and then we'll go to WWE and have more.
So we're going to be taking a little bit of a more in-depth look at the Premiership tonight. You know, looking at incomings, outgoings, talking points, results, and everything in between. It may be a little bit tough listening if you're a Brummies fan like me. It may be a little bit of good listening if you're a Bellevue fan like some people. And it may just be a
Oh,
bit
poor people.
and it might just be a little bit interesting if you just like Speedway. We're going to start off, we're going to go in alphabetical order because we're not very sensible, so that's the way we're going to do it. So, Palmer, do you want to take us away with the Bellevue review?
So I'll kick us off with the Premiership League champions, who started their season off with Brady Kurtz, Dan Bewley, Jamin Lindsay, Ben Cook, Norwick Bladon, Connor Mountain, and Connor Bailey. Probably to no surprise to the two of us, the first change they made was they released Connor Mountain, who was doing a very, very solid job for the Bellevue Aces and brought in Tate Zishki, who got injured in his first meeting for them, and then brought in Ante Vulas. Connor Bailey, who was struggling towards mid-season, he decided to quit, and they brought in Jake Mulford, a rider who, in my opinion, made a lot of difference in the playoff for Bellevue. The Aces, they finished third in the league on 37 points, as they defeated Sheffield in the playoff semi-final, and then they demolished Leicester home and away in the grand final in what was probably one of the most boring finals in British Speedway history. In the Knockout Cup, Bellevue and Sheffield raced each other in the first round. I don't know if you've noticed this, but we seem to get like a lot of Bellevue and Sheffield meetings in a year now.
We do.
The 25 War of the Roses meetings that we get every year is a bit boring now. PSPA, if you're watching, take note of what your fans are trying to tell you. So Bellevue and Sheffield raced in the first round of the Knockout Cup, and it was level on aggregate after 30 heats. And Sheffield advanced to the next round with a 7-2 in the superheat in the second leg of that.
As you mentioned there, the incomings and outgoings really made a difference. Me and you, neither of us were overly surprised by Connor Mountain being released, although I think we both agree it was harsh because he'd had a really good season up until that point.
I mean, we went on Name Redacted podcast. I wouldn't bother going and listening back to it, and we predicted that Connor would probably be the first one to go from Bellevue for Tate, and so it wasn't any surprise to the two of us. But Connor did, and I know I'm gonna sound like I'm sticking up for him because he's a Scunny rider. I'm not sticking up for him for that reason, but he was banging in 4 or 5 points a meeting home and away, and that's the job he was brought in to do.
I think he was a little bit, there was a lot of eyes on him as well because I don't think it's harsh on our part to say that Connor Bailey just didn't perform at all. So when the Rising Star wasn't scoring a lot, there was more pressure being heaped onto Connor Mountain.
Yeah, 100%, and it was tough on Connor, and I think had this is going to sound awful, and I don't mean any disrespect to you. Had Connor Bailey retired earlier or ended his season earlier, Connor Mountain may still have been in that Bellevue team at the end of the season.
But then Mark Lemon does love an Aussie, and that was where
Yeah.
Tajishki came in, weren't it?
He likes Aussies, doesn't he?
Just a little bit. We've got 5 viewers viewing, including Dan Winchester, who's messaged me to say he's tuned in. What a boy! And if anyone's got any comments or thoughts on our talkies of the Premiership, get in the comments and keep us talking.
Yes.
Playoffs. They had, I think it was Sheffield in the semi-final, weren't it? And,
yes, and
I think everybody expected Sheffield to trounce them, and they just didn't.
Oh, to be fair, the scorelines was exactly identical as the playoff final from 2022. If Sheffield if certain members of the Sheffield crew had performed better at Bellevue, then it could have been a totally different story. But yeah, it's one of them. History's in the bag now, and they are keeping a little bit of continuity as they've re-signed Jake Mulford for the 2025 season.
And when you look at that Rising Stars list, I do think his experience and stuff, he didn't set any of the world on fire when he first came in, but after he got going and stuff and confidence started to flow, he really did, hold his own, winning a massive Heat 8 in the final, first leg at Bellevue, and I think that was a 5-1 as well.
I believe it was.
He wasn't consistent, but he was solid when it counted.
Mm.
And it might have been just a good luck that came from the fact he had his champions Kevlars on from 2023.
So,
Well, they had them in 23, didn't they? Or was it 22? No,
yeah.
23 of the
No, it was
season they used them
23
on.
because it was 22 that won it, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. So,
We can't do maths.
speak for yourself. Deserving champions over all of the season. They were a little bit under the radar, I think it's fair to say, but they turned up when it mattered.
I think it's one of them, and it's something that obviously we'll talk more about as the further along the line we go. Had injuries not happened at other clubs, would Bellevue have made the playoffs? Had team changes not happened at Oxford, would Oxford have clinched that to clinch their spot? It's all ifs and buts and coconuts now, but over the playoff part of the season, I've no complaints with Bellevue winning.
So that's the champions discussed. Now we move on to the Birmingham Brummies of their first season in the top flight. Moving up, I think it's fair to say, wasn't the best decision, but it was the only decision really.
It was, to be fair, wasn't it? It was never going to be an easy season. Obviously, I believe you can correct me here if I'm wrong. You was accepted into the league quite late as well,
Yeah, it was
so
all done.
riders have already sorted deals and everything out. So it wasn't ideal.
No. So the team that the Brummies did start with in March was Vaclav Milik, Steve Worrell, Victor Lampart, Tom Brennan, Piotr Pavlicki, Zach Cook, and Leon Flint, the rising star. Throughout the season, there were multiple changes. First of all, Zach Cook was released when Birmingham signed the world number 2 at that point, Freddie Lindgren, in what was a massive signing for the club and for British Speedway as a whole, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, it was. It certainly opened people's eyes, didn't it?
Did.
And it did the signing work out. Some may argue it probably didn't, but we got a big name back in Britain, which proved to be a talking point.
It did, and he got better as the season went on. Obviously, got a faultless. I think he got a faultless maximum in the final meeting of the season at Ipswich. I know Ipswich were depleted and they would end up going out in the semi-final stage of the playoffs. But to go there and get a 5-ride maximum, I think it was to round out his British season for last season. And if rumours are to be believed, he's obviously signed a contract now in Sweden. Will he be back in Britain next season? I'd probably say not. So to round out his latest stint in British Speedway with a faultless evening.
One way to bow out, innit?
It is a bit. Other changes through the season. Steve Worrell was ruled out part way through with illness. I can't quite remember what he was down. Well, I can. I just can't say the word.
I'm the same.
But it was an illness that can last and linger around even after symptoms go.
And that fills all insert championship club name. He has fans full of hope that they're new number one.
Vaclav Milik was also released, probably about a month too late, but better late than never. He was terrible. He had a really bad season. I don't know what anyone was expecting.
He was more disappointing than what I am on dating sites.
He wasn't great. I don't think it was through lack of effort. Obviously, working in the pits, he did try. He tried. It just didn't happen. And I know other clubs approached him after he left Birmingham, and he turned it down. I just think that was his last hurrah in British Speedway, and he almost bowed out on a whimper.
I mean, obviously, I know rumours aren't necessarily to be believed, but he is being linked with a couple of championship clubs for 2025.
But he did have a pretty serious injury that almost cost him his life at the back end of this season, just gone now.
He did. That he did, and hopefully he's recovering all right now.
The other changes, Justin Sedgman, I think, was the rider to come in for Vaclav Milik.
I believe that is correct.
Said he got injured racing for Edinburgh, came back, got injured again, cut his season short. Was doing really well for Birmingham before that point.
Yeah, he was. He was proven to be a signing of the season. At the time, he was almost riding like a heat leader for you guys.
Yeah. Michael Palm Toft was signed as a temporary replacement initially for Steve Worrell, which turned into a sort of last quarter of the season signing. A man you saw quite a lot at Scunny this year. I think it's fair to say he didn't pull up any trees.
No, and to be fair, uh, it's come up in the last 4 or 5 meetings, especially at home. He was quite a disappointment. I know he'd been suffering with a knee injury, but why would you want to ride if you're gonna mess your knee up even more?
And then and in the biggest meetings of the season as well, in the playoffs, which we will cover more in the championship review, which will be confirmed later on tonight. And in
Well,
the most bizarre, I think, team change of the lot at the Brummies, Zach Cook ended up being re-signed again after being released for Freddie, and he came in to join up with the rider he initially was replaced by, and did a fantastic job.
100%. He 100% deserves to get Birmingham's Rider of the Season. If you ask me, he performed as a consistent second string, and yeah,
Started at reserve as well. Started the season at number 6.
and that. So he wasn't as crap as what Mr. Tolley initially thought.
No. For Birmingham's league season, Wood finished the season bottom of the pile on 11 points. I think 5 of those were put up in the last. Or 6, 5, 6, one of them. 5 of them were put up in the last
One
two
of
meetings of the season, with the wins at home and away against Ipswich, who were depleted. There's no two ways about it, but can only beat what's in front of you.
Yeah, 100%. It's just sort of how it is, isn't it? How Speedway goes, and we'll move on to Ipswich in the not too distant future.
And Birmingham's wins against Ipswich was probably just a little bit of revenge for Ipswich knocking them out in the semi-final stage of the Knockout Cup. And as Palmer says, we'll now move on to Ipswich, who were strongly fancied by a lot of people, and rightfully so, to be league champions this season. Palmer, do you want to run us through this one?
Yeah, 100%. These were my tips to be the champions as well at the start of the season. And they started the team with Emil Seifutinov, Jason Doyle, Danny King, Adam Ellis, Keenan Rue, Jordan Jenkins, and Dan Thompson. And they finished with the exact same 7, right? Well, technically 5, because Doyle and Emil got injured, and Ipswich probably tried to replace them riders, but they just couldn't get a deal done. Which is finished 4th overall in the league standings with 34 points. Having dominated most of the campaign, there was winning home and away, and quite convincingly during the early to mid part of the season. As soon as Emil had his crash at Sheffield, it's safe to say that was when the wheels were falling off the Witches. The coach without Doyley, but the current coach without both of them being out. And Ipswich, they lost to Leicester in a very controversial playoff semi-final, shall we say.
And I think we've got to start by looking at the injuries. That was just so much bad luck to lose arguably undoubtedly the two best riders in the league in Jason Doyle and Emil Seifutinov.
I mean, Doyle was having the season of his life. He was probably the only contender in the GPs at that point that could maybe even put some pressure on Bartosz. And I don't like to get political, but Emil's probably the best rider in the world, not in the GPs at the minute.
Yeah.
To lose riders of that caliber is gut wrenching for Witches fans.
And we've got to touch on it. the playoff semi final, the bad luck they had.
Oh,
You couldn't have
if
scripted that, could you? You could not have written it.
I think Chris Louis and Richie Hawkins run over a few black cats.
Was that before or
Um,
after they walked under the ladders?
while I was walking under the ladders in little tykes cars. Yeah, it was very controversial, that meeting at Leicester. The meeting at Ipswich was not a lot really happened. But yeah, it was an incident part meeting, and will forever be known as the day the Trunchbull turned up.
And you say they made no team changes. Obviously, I think Chris Louis or Richie Hawkins, one of the two, mentioned at Ipswich in the last meeting of the season, in the playoff semi final, I think it was, that they had tried to get Freddie Lindgren for the playoffs, and they'd approached Lublin, and Lublin had said no. His Polish club. So they did try everything they could to get Freddie.
Yeah, they certainly tried, but obviously, we all know how Speedway works. Poland rules the roost. That was that. In the knockout cup competition, Ipswich had a little bit more luck as they went through to the final, as they overcome Leicester in the first round. So Leicester obviously getting their revenge in the playoff final. Before Dill defeating Birmingham in the semis,
Still
in which
hurts.
they ended up losing to Sheffield over 2 legs. Again, in one of the most boring finals in Speedway history.
If the injuries hadn't have happened, do Bellevue win the league? I know it's easy to say if buts and maybes, but in your opinion, if the injuries hadn't have happened, do Bellevue still win, or do you think Ipswich would have won?
I think Ipswich would have been in the final. It all depends on who would have got who in the semis, because I think the league positions may have been slightly different. But if that team finished the season, and then Ipswich definitely would have been in the final. Probably would have put in a bit more of an effort than Leicester.
Yeah, and we can discuss the refereeing. Obviously, Leicester didn't have much of a say in that, but Ipswich can rightly feel hard done by. And talking about Ipswich this morning, announced the return of Emil Saivudanov for 2025. So good for Ipswich, good for British Speedway to see, in as you've just said, probably the best rider in the world not in the Grand Prix series back.
Massive news for Britain, and it is great to see that Emil's back, because we've it obviously has gone on record and said that Britain's helping him develop as a rider, and that's the sort of news we want, and hopefully a rider of Emil's caliber can help bring these riders back. I mean, I'm not saying Emil's done this, but we've got Yankovic over here now, and we've got a load more GP / higher rated internationals over in the UK.
We have, and obviously we have ears to the ground, and it's there's a fairly consistent rumour going around of what Ipswich's team is for next season, and if that is to be believed, then that's going to be a team that does take a lot of stopping.
100%.
So we move from Suffolk to Norfolk next for Kings Lynn, who postponed more meetings than they ran at one point for a whole host of reasons.
They've gone from a team that made no changes to a team that made 1,000,003.
And that was just the fixtures. Their starting 7 was a team that many were excited about. 4 riders that moved over from Peterborough once they closed at the back end of 2023. Obviously, Tobias Michalak coming back from 2 brilliant seasons at Sheffield, and an exciting looking rising star in Anders Rowe. Their starting 7 was Tobias Michalak, Vadim Tarasenko, Niels Christian Everson, Benjamin Basso, Michael Palmtoft, Patrick Wojtolo and Anders Rowe. Their changes throughout the season Nicola Clint came in when Oxford released him quite early on. Actually, that was a bit of a surprise.
Well, I think it was about 4 meetings in, wasn't
It
it?
was a massive shock so early.
It was, wasn't it?
And Yankovic, Grand Prix rider, obviously newcomer to British Speedway, came in on a very modest 6 point average to British Speedway, which he absolutely made a mockery of.
Yeah, and I mean anybody that watches our streams know that he's become a favourite of mine quite swiftly this year. And he's certainly he made the darker days in Kings Lynn a bit brighter. I think it's safe to say, and I would not be surprised if Yankovic is back at Saddlebore Road in 2025.
And their last incoming rider was signed after he was also released from the Oxford Spires, Lewis Kerr. So it was almost the Kings Lynn Oxford Spires stars. There was a
The
few of them there.
the Kings Lynn OXS stars.
And the outgoings, they lost two of their big names. Vadim Tarasenko was the first to leave, just stating that he didn't want to race British Speedway anymore.
So he says.
And it's that came a little bit out of the blue because obviously he seemed to enjoy his second half of the season once he signed for Peterborough in 23, and he was giving it everything.
Yeah, 100%. You know, it was pretty cool. T-shirt coming soon, by the way. But yeah, it was. You know, he'd done a very solid job at Glasgow and at Peterborough last year. I think a lot of people expected the same from him, but I think he only lasted about half a dozen meetings for the Stars this year. Obviously, not wanting to do British Speed was a massive loss because he was another one of the big names that had come over, and yeah, it was a bit gutting for Kings Lynn.
And I think for British Speedway on the whole, when we lost Tarasenko and the other rider that left, their other high profile rider, Tobias Michalak, not quite as high profile as Vadim Tarasenko in some respects, but certainly more a proven rider in British Speedway.
Yeah, and again, I don't quite know the reasonings behind why Tobias left Kings Lynn. Obviously, we understand he wanted to potentially move over to Ipswich, which got blocked by BSPL. Shame, because obviously there were the 2 years he was at Sheffield, I was going regular and he was always man of the meeting. He would pull off moves that nobody else would pull off around Sheffield. He proved that you had to have balls to ride around there, and yeah, it was a big shame that he left Kings Lynn.
Yeah, for sure, and he's an eye-catching rider. I remember watching him at Wolves when he first came to Britain in 2015, and sometimes he was losing to the opposition reserves more often than not, and then to see him become a solidified out-and-out number one in British Speedway. He did struggle the start of this season. He didn't quite find the form he had at Sheffield, and then obviously decided to leave, but and then again, yeah, there was the rumour that Ipswich wanted to sign him and Kings Lynn hadn't released him, so it was blocked. And then once the transfer window closed, Kings Lynn then did release him from their declared lineup because shithousery and all that.
The Speedway merry-go-round, it never fails, does it?
Kings Lynn's league season, they started quite tough, but the impact signing, I think, of Yankovic, along with other factors, turned that around. Kings Lynn finished sixth in the league with 22 points, but failed to make the playoffs. Like the Brummies, Kings Lynn received a bye in the Knockout Cup to advance to the semi-final stage, which they lost out to eventual champions Sheffield.
That they did. Not necessarily surprised by that, to be fair. Kings Lynn has never travelled well at Sheffield, to be fair. So yeah, that was no real surprise.
We'll now look at the bridesmaids of the season. Many people's pick in the final, particularly when it was Bellevue, the opposition. A lot of people thought Leicester would absolutely blitz them away, and I think we both said this on the watch-alongs. In those finals, Leicester were lucky to get through the semi-final, but were really disappointing in the final.
It was. And yeah, it wasn't the best of finals for Leicester, who started with Max Frick, Ryan Douglas, Sam Masters, Luke Becker, Richard Lawson, Drew Kemp, and Joe Thompson, um, which looked like a very solid lineup on paper. You know, you've got five no out and out real superstars, number ones in there, but five out and out proven heat leaders in British Speedway, with Drew Kemp at reserve, who has proved himself in the Premiership, and obviously local lad Joe Thompson getting rising star, and he was the first rider to be released.
I think that was by mutual decision, though, wasn't it? Because I think Joe was struggling himself as
He
well.
was, he was, and it must have taken a toll doing all three leagues and trekking down to Plymouth and everything as well. I know Joe doesn't actually work outside of Speedway as well, which is interesting.
A lot of
Um,
riders do that now, don't they? Especially this time of year.
but Joe was replaced by British Under 21 champion Sam Hagan. We move that, for me, didn't do Sam Hagan any favours.
I think we've both agreed on this. We have pointed it out numerous times on watch-alongs for Paul. His form did dip off a little bit when he got into the Premiership, and as a rider, you're going to want to do that. You're going to want to advance, and he'd have been high on confidence from winning the under-21 British title, but his season almost derailed a little bit once Leicester signed him.
It did, and they have re-signed him for 2025. Hopefully, he can have a bit more of a less pressured season and can just go and enjoy it. And the other change they made was releasing Drew Kemp, signing Craig Cook, who then gets injured, and then they bring back Drew Kemp for the playoffs.
Bar me. It must just be clubs that race in yellow and red or red and yellow that like to release riders and then bring them back.
Well, sometimes it happens. But yeah, so the Lions had their best ever season in the Premiership in 2024. They finished second in the league on 40 league points, and they made the end of season playoffs. As we've mentioned, they got past Ipswich in the semi-finals in controversial fashion, but they was absolutely demolished by Bellevue in the playoff final, and in the knockout cup, Leicester lost to Ipswich in the first round.
We both said this at the time, and there was a lot made of it that Leicester had gone on a really good unbeaten run towards the end of the season. We've both said
Mm,
that they peaked just a touch too early because
yeah,
they almost melted in the playoffs. They were very fortunate to get past Ipswich, and then Bellevue completely figured them out and had their number.
unpopular opinion. The playoff, if it could have been worked, like the playoff final would have been Bellevue Sheffield, it would have been so much better than what we had this year for a playoff final.
And it's a shame,
Just
but the meeting was as a tie was almost completely done by the end of the
it,
first leg
it,
anyway.
it was done by 8:13 of the first leg.
Yeah, they kept it close early on what was a very wet night in Manchester, and then Bellevue got it together and pulled out a nice big lead for them to take to Leicester, and Leicester just never got going at home either.
A wet night in Manchester, I'm not having that.
Does it rain in Manchester? So now we move on to the second new coming team into the Premiership for 2024, the Oxford Spires. The one of the three teams that Oxford decided to run this season in all three leagues. That was an ambitious move, but for the most part, it worked.
It did. There was very. For saying they didn't really win anything, they've been quite successful, aren't they? So, yeah.
Yeah, the lineup starting for the Spires in March was the massive coup of Polish international and 2024 Grand Prix reserve, who ended up finishing the season in the series, Maciej Janowski, Nikolai Clint, Rowan Tungate, Chris Harris, Charles Wright, Lewis Kerr, and Ashton Bowden was the rising star. They made a couple of changes throughout the season. Nikolai Clint, as we said earlier, got released quite early on.
Yeah.
They then
Uh,
signed, was it Lewis Kerr
uh,
first?
it was. I can't remember.
Drew Kemp replaced
That's the one. Drew come in
Louis.
first, and then Louis come in for Drew, and then Eric come in for Louis. Oh,
Was
my
it? Oh
Jesus
no,
Christ.
Craig Cook
Ox,
replaced Lewis Kerr, and Drew Kemp replaced Craig Cook after his 28
O-
days.
Oxford's been through more riders this year than I've had burgers.
So they made a couple of strange changes, I think it's fair to say. Eric Riss was the first rider to come in to replace Nicola Clint. It's no secret that Peter Stroke is quite fond of Eric Riss as a rider, and that
I
was
believe
highlighted with this.
is Peter Schrock not German himself?
Yeah, he's got, yeah, so that was that one. Then Craig Cook came in as a temporary replacement for Lewis Kerr. Got injured,
Lewis
didn't he?
Kerr. Yes, Kerr got injured, and then Craig Cook come in on a 28-day contract and got a new set of Kevlars, which was quite bizarre in for a 28-day
Mhm.
deal.
Mm.
Um, and then in the end, Oxford thought, you know what, sod both of them. We'll have Luke Colleen instead.
Yeah, it was the merry-go-round, weren't it? And then Luke Killeen came in as their new rising star. Ashton Bergen moved out of the rising star position to number 6. Luke Killeen has been confirmed for 2025 as Oxford's rising star, and Ashton Bergen moves to Kings Lynn as theirs.
That he does.
Uh, During the league, the Oxford Spires finished 5th in the overall league standings. They just never got their run together. Maybe just couldn't settle the
No,
team. There was a lot of changes, weren't there?
there was, and when you've got changes like that coming basically out of your heroes every day, well, it felt like every week. You know, it's hard to it's hard to settle a team down when you're making more team changes than brews in a residential home.
Yeah. And obviously they finished just outside the playoffs on 26 points. Oxford didn't participate in the Knockout Cup. I assume that was due to availability of the track, obviously running in 3 leagues, plus all the competitions that comes with that. You know, some things would have had to have been sacrificed.
Yeah, 100%.
And finally, the other team, I think it's fair to say that were fancied quite early on in the season, the Sheffield Tigers.
So my local Premiership team an hour down the road. They started their season with Jack Holder, Chris Holder, Ty Wolfenden, Josh Pickering, Kyle Howarth, Jason Edwards, and Dan Jilks. And the Tigers didn't make any team changes at all in 2024, which is bizarre coming from what we've just heard at Oxford, who replaced virtually every rider and re-signed them. Uh, it's been a strange year for
It has.
Premiership
It has.
Speedway. Um, and the Tigers finished top of the regular league standings. And with a team like that, you'd sort of expect it. Obviously, Ty Wolfenden getting injured midway through the season didn't really affect them right until the very, very end, when Jack Alder got injured at, I want to say Riga, but I could be wrong. It was either Riga or Voyens. It was one of them two, one of the latter GPs, and it's safe to say at that point the wheels just kind of fell off for the Alderton outlet.
Yeah, that's spot on. You know, you look at that top 3 of the Holder brothers and Ty Wolfenden, and that's such a power pack top 3 as well. You know, two, well, at that point, current Grand Prix riders, a former world champion in there as well. Obviously, 4 world titles between Wolfenden and Chris. So there's a hell of a lot of proven potential there. Plus Carl Hearth and Josh Pickering. Josh Pickering a little bit more of a late bloomer to the top
Mm.
flight in British Speedway, but Carl Hearth's been around for a long time. And then the experienced, albeit maybe not quite on the top of their game, reserves in Jason Edwards and Dan Jilks.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say, and I like Jason and Dan both very, very well. They're both people I consider to be really good pals. Um, it's safe to say I think Jason was the the better of the two, and Dan just struggled a lot with confidence until he got his move to red car.
Yeah, and ironically, neither of those riders are back there next year, with Jason Edwards being selected as Birmingham's Rising Star for 2025 and Dan Gilks missing out on a Premiership spot for the start of
Well,
the season.
I mean, if the Sheffield team's what I've heard it's going to be, Gilksy may still be there.
Possibly. And Leon Flint is the Sheffield Rising Star this year, a track that should suit him really well, actually.
Keyword being should. Um, but yeah, I hope it works out for him after a tough year this year. So obviously the Sheffield team was defeated by Bellevue in the playoff semi-final, whereas the Knockout Cup, Sheffield won the Knockout Cup by defeating Ipswich in the final. They beat Bellevue in the first round, and then they demolished Kings Lynn in the semi-final to advance.
So just before we look at our Premiership team of the season, we've both done one of these. What are your thoughts on this season's Premiership? You know, from the additions, the riders that were there, the champions, the playoffs, and stuff from what we've seen.
The playoffs are definitely here to stay, regardless of whether people like them or not.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they're a big crowd puller. I mean, just look at the crowd that was at Leicester for the second leg of the final there.
Yeah.
You know, it was unbelievable. The season as a whole, I'm quite jealous because obviously you get to see Premiership Speedway because you work with Birmingham.
Mm-hmm.
I'm quite jealous of the fact you get to have two home and two away. Like we would love that in the Championship because you get regular fixtures. And yeah, it's certainly been an interesting season. Obviously, Oxford had a decent season stepping up. So yeah, if we could get some more teams in the Premiership and some more riders available to come over here, then what's to say the Premiership can't be as good as what the Elite League was back in like 20 years ago.
And we did a couple of watch-alongs to Premiership racing from Eurosport, obviously on our own screens. There was a lot made. We can't listen to the commentary when we do those because of copyright, but a lot's made of Calvin Tatum as a lead commentator. And what are your thoughts on that? Is that, I mean, I don't think they'd get rid of him, but is it time to freshen it up, or maybe stop having a guest commentator with him every week and give somebody that secondary role?
I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm licking our asses here, but I think we get it right. We've got two fans that aren't necessarily, do it like we do what we do for enjoyment. We don't do it for work. We don't do it for money. We do it because we enjoy it. When you listen to Kelvin Tatum, he's almost like got that work head on, like he's not enjoying it that much. And I think, he's clearly missing Nigel Pearson as lead commentator. But I think he could do with a bit of a shake up.
Yeah.
I'm not saying completely get rid of Kelvin, but maybe if you could have Scott Nichols as a commentator with somebody like what Nigel Pearson was, just because Scott's got more knowledge, if you like, of modern day bikes and equipment and everything. Scott would give you a bit more of a better insight than Kelvin. So if they could maybe just switch them two around, it would be a bit better.
And just to finish up on, shall we have a look through? We've both gone away and looked at the overall statistics and riders who have improved and stuff for our Premiership teams of the season. Have you got any honourable mentions before we look at our team of the season?
I really, really struggled putting this one together. So there's no honourable mentions.
My honourable mentions for the Premiership team of the season. These were riders that were solid enough but didn't quite make the cut for me. Ty Wolfenden, Dan Bewley, Zach Cook, Jason Doyle. I think that one's quite obvious because he only did about half a season. Keenan Rue, Ryan Douglas, Rowan Tungate, and Matt Sayanovsky I've included in there because although he had a difficult start to the season, towards the end he started to show what he can do. And I think it was a lot to expect for him to come back after, I think it was about 8 years away from British Speedway to then come back and fill in straight at number one and fly like you would expect him to in the Grand Prix. Obviously, he had to learn it again, so I think he deserves a mention for the resilience, especially when, at points the Oxford fans were calling for his head. And I've also gave Scott Nichols an honourable mention for the guest bookings he did early on in the season for Birmingham and later on in the season, more often than not, filling in at number one for Jason Doyle at Ipswich and doing a more than creditable job.
Oh, 100%. Do you want to start with your team of the season, Squire?
Should we you do your 7, number 7, I'll do mine, then your 6, mine, your 5, mine, and we'll do it that way?
Well, I mean, I haven't got them in any order, but we'll do them like that.
We'll do 7 to 1.
At the bottom of my pile, you've just mentioned him as an honourable mention, but I've gone for Majitinoski. Again, start the season a little bit crap, but he got better towards the end of the season and proved to be the heat leader that Oxford wanted, and I would not be surprised if he is back as a Spire in 2025.
Yeah, I've gone with Niels Christian Everson. He was one of only, I think, 2 riders that ended the season with Kings Lynn that started the season there. He raced at number 5 a fair bit as well, which if the top 2 had stayed, he wouldn't have done as much. But every time I saw him race, he looked like he was maybe not at his top, like brilliant best ever, but he was certainly better than the Niels Christian Everson we've seen in recent seasons.
100%. So, the number 6 position, I've gone for a rider you know quite well, Tom Brennan. Probably one of the biggest improvers of the league this year. Again, none of mine are in any particular order. Yeah, he's improved quite a lot this year as Tom. He had a stint at number 1 for Birmingham. He won the treble with Paul. He rode in the GPs and showed he can mix it with the big boys. I think he was, and I'm probably could speak for both of us here, a shoe-in for both of our team of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. My number 6 is Dan Thompson, rising star at Ipswich. Started phenomenally, moved straight up into the main body, did the majority of the season in the main body. Came back from injury and then dropped to reserve right at the end, but I think he had a fantastic season and really kicked on and showed what people thought he would do maybe 2 or 3 years ago, but he's definitely got to the point where I think he wants to be. And again, if word on the street is to be believed, it will be hot property. He gets a 25% reduction on his average for graduating the Rising Star programme, so he'll be available on an average of less than 3.5, which I think is a bargain for a rider like that.
Yeah. So my number 5, you've already mentioned him. Niels Christian Everson, again, very, very solid season. A bit like another rider in my Premiership team, and Jankovic, a shining light. A bright spark in a disappointing season in Norfolk.
My number 5 was the captain of the Premiership champions, Brady Kurtz. We have a laugh, and Jessup is absolutely unbearable at points, but Brady Kurtz
is unbearable all the time.
Well, there is that. Brady Kurtz has been solid. He's led from example at number 1. He had a stint on the sidelines, come back in, was fantastic in the meetings where it came to it. Obviously now qualified for the Grand Prix as well. It'll be interesting next year to see how he balances the Grand Prix plus racing in the top division in Poland and Sweden as well, and we presume he'll be back at Bellevue as well. So it'll be interesting to see how he balances all that.
So my next rider I've picked, no bias here whatsoever, but I've gone for Ryan Douglas. I think this year he's stepped up to become a solid heat leader for Leicester without necessarily being noticed, if you ask me.
My number 4 is also a Leicester rider. We've referred to this a few times. The best number 2 in the Premiership, Richard Lawson.
Oh, well, I'll tell you what. Let's just save my next goal because he's my next rider as well.
I
So
just
let's just have this one as one big one.
I just think he was fantastic this season, and obviously it's up to the team manager where he wants to ride him in the body, in the main body of the team. I think number 2, having a rider like that who can trap at number 2 is fantastic, and he just never gives up, does he? He also guested for Kingsley and Ipswich and other teams at number 1 sometimes, and he was fantastic there as well. And for me, yeah, he was absolutely the best number 2 in the league.
Yeah, 100% cannot disagree. Obviously, my next rider would have been Richard Lawson as well. So we'll go to my next best rider, who, again, think you've mentioned him in your team this season, Anders Rowe of Kings Lynn. Obviously started the season as rising star at Saddlebow Road and rode like a heat leader for them virtually all season.
Yeah, I've got Anders Rowe at number 2 for mine. He, like you just said, rode like a heat leader at points. I think there is an argument for him to be Rising Star of the season. I know he was nominated. I think on the British Premiership thing, Dan Thompson won that, and I think rightfully so. But there could have been an argument made for Anders. The only thing is he spent nearly all season at reserve until the latter weeks and then moved up, but he was absolutely fantastic, and again, like Dan Thompson, graduates the Rising Star programme this season. We'll go on to my number 2 first because you did I think you've done your number 2 now, ain't you? Or Richard Lawson.
Yes.
So I'll do my number 2 and then we'll both do our number 1s because I think we've both got the same. My number 2 is Tom Brennan. As you said, he's had a phenomenal season. I got to see him every week at Birmingham, and he was an absolute joy. He was a shining light in a difficult season, and he doesn't like losing, but then find me somebody who does. He's got so much passion and desire for Speedway, and I can imagine he's had a lot of clubs calling. In particular, one from Suffolk, who I would not be surprised to see him join, if I'm honest, and that hurts to say as a Brummies fan, but you've got to go where you've got to go, and if he does end up leaving Birmingham, we can all be incredibly thankful for the season that we got out of Tom Brennan.
Yeah, 100%. And my number 1, a guy from Sheffield called Chris Alder. Absolutely phenomenal season. He's been riding for Sheffield this year. It gives me glimpses of the 2012 world champion, Chris Alder. He's been absolutely fantastic for Sheffield, and yeah, that's about as much as I can say about him, really.
Yeah, Chris Alder was my number 1 as well. I think for me he was the Premiership rider of the season. I know he raced at number 3, but he was looking like a number 1. He finished on an average of shade under 9 throughout the course of the season. He actually added over 1.5 points to his average, and in a team with Jack and Ty Wolfenden as well. That's no mean feat because I can imagine the 3 of those were battling it out every week, knocking on Steady's door to get that heat 15. So for me, Chris Alder was fantastic. He was an absolute joy to watch round Alderton. He flew around it like it was, like it was just so easy.
Yeah, he did, 100%. And yeah, I think that concludes our review.
Before we wrap up, do you want to announce the championship one, which is the next one we're going to be doing?
Yeah, the next one we will do is a championship review. Again, it'll be in a similar presentation of this, and I do believe we've agreed on next Wednesday.
Yeah, maybe a touch earlier. Maybe go at 7 for that.
We go at
7:30.
At 7 o'clock start because we've been on for nearly an hour.
And there's only so much talking.
SH1T
you can do, isn't there?
There's only so much listening to us that people can do.
So yeah, next Wednesday at the slightly earlier start time of 7 o'clock, we'll do our Cab Direct Championship review. That might be a difficult one for Palmer to listen to. We will have Alan and potentially Callum involved in that one if they're both around.
Do we have to have Alan? He doesn't even go to watch his championship team.
Well, we'll confirm who's going to be doing that
But
close
yeah,
to the time.
we'll sort all that out obviously within the week. It'd be cool to get Callum on because well we know privately what his thoughts are of Red Car.
And the
His
chat,
team.
he knows his stuff, don't he? He's our go-to guy for rules and stuff like that because he's just so clued up.
If there's anything that man doesn't know about Speedway, it's probably worth knowing.
Not knowing.
No, knowing. Because that's the only thing. If you got him in a quiz for Speedway, that would be the one thing you'd be able to beat him on. Not that that will ever happen, but just in case.
Noted. Yeah, so that's been our look back over the 2024 Premiership season. There's been some highs, there's been some lows, especially for us at Birmingham. The season's now wrapped up and done. We've got 6 months of well, 5 and a bit, just under 5 maybe. Depends when they decide to start, whether it'll be March or April next year. It's always a bone of contention. Alan said, justice for Alan, bring in Winchester for Parma. There we go. Alan is not going to be involved next week because he's an idiot. But that's been our review of the Premiership. Parma, as always, a massive thanks for your input, and I'll let you wrap us up for the evening.
No problem. So to all of you guys that listen to us ramble on this evening, thank you very much for joining us. I've been Dan, he's been Dylan, we've been talking crap about the Premiership. We'll be back next Wednesday to talk crap about the Championship, and for that, it's a very good